I want to make an electronic record.
And I say, big brother, I don't know anything about electronic records.
If you go back into the archive, there's an awful lot of mucking around with synthesizers and sequencers and using digital textures. We've been dabbling with electronics. In the early days, you know, we were looking for lovers of Prince and the way that Prince would mix together funk, soul and synths. So I don't think it wasn't completely out of the blue.
No. I thought, due to my huge intellect, that it could take me a couple of months, it'll be fine. I'll read some books. Subtractive analog synthesis to try and understand.
Did you say subtractive analog synthesis?
I did.
That sounds like an intellectual to me.
Is really, really difficult to understand. But
I just can't understand what you just said. I mean, your understanding was behind it.
To cut a very long story short, you came back about 6 months later and we had our synth wall in our studio.
Certainly did.
And it's mightily impressive.
Every conceivable sonic object under the sun.
So that was our palette to write songs, and we had the most amazing experience.
Brilliant.
I mean, to be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing.
I know, but many of the great producers, for example, Brian Eno, would say it's your mistakes with technology that drive you into different places. Mm-hmm. And so when you were wrestling with a sequencer or an arpeggiator, you would blunder into noises that go, yes, that's the noise, get that recorded. And you had to record it.
Everything was being recorded all the time.
Yeah, but the actual noise was mechanically coming from these boxes. And there was so many mistakes that turned into benefits. And I was fighting with you all the time. And you would think, this doesn't sound, I'm saying, that sounds exciting. Keep it. Mm-hmm. One of the most exciting experiences I've had writing with you. And in this period, we're always getting strange requests for things, and this is a classic. There was an exhibition on Scottish rock and roll at the National Museum of Scotland called Rip It Up, and they asked me if I could display my Jean-Paul Gaultier multiply buttoned nylon polyester
like 24 buttons
double-breasted jacket that I wore on various top spots in the late 80s. And I did, and so it was verily displayed in its own cabinet. And then they asked me if they could take it into their permanent collection. And I said, yes, you can take it into, but if I can get a wee bit of access to it occasionally, oh no, sir, if you give us it, it becomes part of the permanent collection of the Scottish nation. And you have to give it away. And I thought, not geez about.
It's hanging in there. I was going to say, it's in there.
Commemorated in museums. That's the state we're at the moment.
So the beginning of 2019, in March, our mum passes away.
Yeah, and we were out on the road. Mm-hmm. We knew that she had deteriorated. We left to go and do the gig and left her in a state of half-stroked but totally defiant. She was such a fundamental supporter of you and I as musicians. I mean, she was. My memory of her is of standing up in the middle of the Royal Concert Hall audience, and all I can see is my mother cheerleading the band on and getting everybody around her to clap. She supported our creativity and loved it, and I always thank her for that.
I remember coming home from a nightclub one time in our hometown, Coatbridge, and I was getting closer and closer to the house, and I could see flames coming out a chimney. I thought, that looks a lot like our house, flames coming out the chimney. And I was with a person at the time, and I said, look, I'm really sorry, I can't. That is our house. And I started sprinting towards it. And I burst in the house. I was like, Mum. And she was sitting with all the fan mail, reading it, her eyes just teared up, crying her eyes out and logging the letters, but she was tossing the envelopes into the fire. And there was so many envelopes that the actual chimney went on fire. At 2 a.m.
Went to do the Kelvingrove Bandstand. Now, the Kelvingrove Bandstand is like a kind of a fixture of the West End of Glasgow. It had been restored to become this amazing gig, and it was a beautiful, slightly rainy and then slightly sunny day. We had their full band there. We had 2,500 of an audience, sell-out gig, But it was such a beautiful Glasgow moment. We've had many, many great Glasgow moments from the big day onwards and various halls and theatres in Glasgow. But that was special. I thought the Bandstand was a special gig.
It was as though all the hard work we'd done since 2008, or since 2005, since that TV show, sort of culminated in this celebration of Hue and Cry. And then the summer nights in Glasgow, you don't know what you're going to get. You might get beautiful orange sunsets, and, you know, but the view from the stage is what I always remember, because where the bandstand is, from the stage you can see Glasgow University up to your right,
Yep.
and you can see the Kelvingrove art galleries to your left. So every time you would look up, this is what you were playing to, and dusk's my favourite time of the day, so it was just getting, as the gig went on, it got better and better and better. And then we played Stars Crash Down.
That's right.
And the way that we started it, it was very beautiful, and you've got to kind of set that song up right. Think of the emotion that you're in. Depends how you introduce it. If you're aggressive, or you're passionate, or if you're very playful or optimistic, you can introduce that song different ways.
Sure.
So you have to be aware. So once we'd set the song up and we're playing through, waiting for you to come in for the first line, I looked up and the whole place had their phones up with their torches on.
Nobody hadn't been asked to do it, just happened spontaneously.
I turned round and I looked at John Paul's behind me, and he was wailing up. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, it's an amazing moment.
I can't hear you. What you gonna be?
So by the beginning of 2020, we'd finished writing our electronica songs. And then the next thing was to try and produce them and arrange them and make them into a record. And unfortunately, I think it was literally 3 weeks after we stopped. We'd finished writing the album.
Yeah, ready to go next stage, and kablam, a worldwide pandemic drove us all indoors and scrambled everybody's coordinates. Musicians acutely were regarded, and musical settings and performance settings in general were regarded as petri dishes for it. We were prime vectors for it, so we had to be shut down completely. And then the thing was, well, you know, musicians, often when faced with a challenge, innovate. We're in a world of online performance. People can download us. People can pay for us for a ticket if they want to download us. Why don't we try to set up something that's a kind of response, a musical live response to lockdown? Let's go out and see who's creating the software, who's creating the financial systems, how do we promote it, how do we create the gig ourselves. The wheels started to turn about how we started to do it, and we started to create these online lockdown events.
Hello everyone. Say hello, Greg.
Are we live?
Are we live? I think we're supposed to be. Hi everyone, welcome to Live from the Lockdown.
The first one was live from lockdown,
Yeah,
which I guess was just the set we were doing anyway.
yeah.
The second one was A's and B's.
A-sides and B-sides. Yeah.
So tracks we'd never played before.
Yeah.
And that proved really popular. And then the third one at Christmas,
It's Christmas.
was the Christmas one.
Which I think I remembered my daughter Eleanor came in and sang on at a certain point.
And then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like I love you.
But we did one called Hope in History, and the idea that hope in history rhymes, that was the kind of the phrase that was taken from Seamus Heaney, the famous Irish poet. And we thought, why don't we do an Irish songbook? And we researched the songs, and we went all the way back to the folk songs from our own past, all the way up to stuff from Hosier and the script, and all the way through U2 and Divine Comedy. And I remember it being incredibly intense on the night, because we had all this, and it was incredibly demanding for me vocally, but we nailed most of it. And by the time we got to the end of it, I thought, this has been a great artistic act. To actually do this, to have this relationship to our heritage and our musical background, and to do it as an act of creative defiance of these ridiculous conditions. And by that time, I had gotten over the fact that every time you surge to the end of a song, there's no applause. There's no one there to give you immediate feedback. So that's one of the weird aspects of doing these live streaming paid-for gigs.
it's you.
I mean, this is when lockdown restrictions were fluctuating. All the gigs that we had in the book were rescheduled.
Yeah.
So there was so much volatility in the live scene. I mean, even we were phoned up and asked to do a drive-in gig.
I remember. Yeah.
So the idea was we would perform on stage and the audience would not only be at a distance, but in cars at a distance. And I guess rather than applauding, they would beep their horns.
Yeah.
And this was, they ran
We were
with it.
ready to go with that, weren't we?
And eventually, eventually they said they were going to open up again, so they thought, hey, what's the point in doing this? I've got great footage, and they're in these spherical plastic bubbles.
Yeah.
And the audience on spherical plastic bubbles. We went to such lengths to keep the live experience happening.
Yeah.
I think our idea of doing online gigs is probably a bit safer than doing all that.
Looking over
So by July of 2021, there was a mad scramble to go out and gig again.
Yeah.
So a thank you to all the fans that
Yes, absolutely.
agreed to the postponing rather than the cancelling. I mean, if you wanted your ticket money back, you got your money back. But you were given the option to go to a postponed event. And across the board, not only our gigs, but all bands' gigs, about 80% of people did not cancel.
Yeah.
So that was showing such support for music fans to music makers. So eternally grateful for that. But it was chaos at that time.
Yeah.
We made it. We
Yeah.
got through it. And we did all those gigs. Festivals, Rewind,
I
club
think-
gigs, theatre gigs.
There's a sort of pent-up defiance and requirement amongst audiences to come out and see people again in a way to kind of be with each other, out with these moments of isolation. Lots and lots to say about this period in time. I think it's changed the way that we think about coming together. I think we value it more and more. I think gigs are on the up as a human experience. People want them. And I think that's partly a consequence of COVID, people feeling isolated in the face of this global disease. In that circumstance, what do you really value? You value being with other people, seeing things that you all love and having that experience. I think it's profoundly changed the way that we think about music and community. And I think we're doing more gigs than ever before because I think there's an increased demand for them. And we're now playing Thursdays as much rather than Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, because people are demanding that they have more meaningful times in their lives as a consequence of COVID and us facing mortality street by street, house by house.
Here's to Thursday night gigs.
Here's to Thursday, maybe Wednesday night gigs as well.
Steady.
Got to stay for the day to get into your cold heart. Ain't gonna work for you no more. Or shall we do this again? Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.